Welcome to another ADLC Northland Social Studies presentation. Today we'll be looking at democracies and the different way in which they form a government, as well as the different kind of governments that can be formed. In a democracy, power comes from the people and flows up to the government. The people choose the government by having elections. The form of these elections and the types of governments can be very different. The first system we're going to take a look at here is the first-past-the-post system, or what's called plurality. In first-past-the-post, the candidate with the most votes wins. This candidate does not necessarily need a majority, but needs the most votes. The idea of first-past-the-post comes from a racing analogy when it comes to racing horses, because they need to get their nose past the post to win. This is the system that we use in Canada, so it's most likely the one that you're most familiar with. And we'll take a look at the example here with the 2008 results from Strathcona County. In this case, we have some candidates. We have Linda Duncan from the NDP, we have Raheem Jaffer, who's a Conservative, Claudette Roy, who's a Liberal, and Jane Thrall, who's a Green. When it comes to first past the post, Linda Duncan received 42.5% of the vote, and received, of the popular vote, and received 20,076 votes of the votes cast. Because she received the most votes of any of the candidates, she wins because of first. Another way in which you can choose a government based in a democracy is called proportional representation. With proportional representation, you need at least 2 or more parties. Candidates are chosen based on their share of the popular vote, instead of having the most votes. In proportional representation, political parties are represented in proportion for the amount of votes cast. So let's take a look at our imaginary example here. Imagine you want to elect 4 candidates and you have 3 political parties with 100 votes cast. You have a list of candidates and each is affiliated with a political party. If Party A gets 50 votes, and Party B gets 25 votes, and Party C gets 25 votes, this is what the system looks like in a proportional representation form of government. Because Party A received 50% of the votes of the popular vote, they received 2 seats out of the 4 that are available. Party B received 25% of the vote and therefore gets 1 seat out of the 4. And Party C received 25% of the vote and also gets 1 seat out of the 4. If we remember back to first past the post, in this situation, Party A would win all the seats because they had the most votes. So proportional representation, you get a proportion of the seats based on your share of the popular vote. And first past post, you just need the most. In addition to the different ways you can elect a government, there are different types of governments which can be formed within a democracy. The first form of government we'll take a look at is what's called a majority government, and it's the current government in which we have in Canada federally. When a party holds 50% or more of the seats, they form what's called a majority government. So in this case, we'll go back to our example with parties A, B, and C. Party A has 50% of the seats and will form the government. With them having 50% of the seats, they also form what's called a majority government. When a party has a majority, it is easier to pass legislation, as opposition parties are not able to block it. Majority governments also tend to be more stable due to the fact they're unlikely to be defeated on confidence votes. And confidence votes are things like the budget, in which if the ruling party does not receive all the votes, then the government falls. Another form of government that we can take a look at is what's called a minority government. And a minority government has happened several times in Canadian history. A minority government is formed when a government has the most seats or percentage, but has less than 50. So for example here, if we look at our parties, we have Party A, B, C, and D, with Party A having 40%, Party B having 30%, Party C having 20%, and Party D having 10%. In this case, Party A would form the government, but it would be called a minority government. With a minority government, they tend to be less stable because other parties can join together and block them. They also require much more cooperation between parties. The final form of government we'll take a look at today is called the coalition government. And a coalition government is formed when two or more parties join their totals together to form a government. In our scenario here, it's likely that Party A would form the government because they had 40%. Now, parties B, C, and D could join together in what's called a coalition and form the government because they have more than Party A. Coalition governments agree to share power between them. With coalition governments, there has to be lots of forms of cooperation. And we often see this in places that have proportional representation. And it's very common in the European Union. Democracy is a common form of government, but it can look very different depending on its interpretations. We will look at other forms of government and more democratic theory in other videos.